Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm putting out the second of my previews for patch 9.2 of Shadowlands. Just a day after we put out our video covering the 2 legendary system as it's being implemented in patch 9.2 and how we think that's going to affect tank classes and their covenant choices in the next raid tier and Mythic Plus season, Blizzard dropped all of the tier sets. So before we go diving through all of the tier sets class by class, let's just cover how you're going to acquire them, because I think Blizzard have done a really good job with this. So here's some snippets of the blue post that Blizzard put out covering tier sets in patch 9.2, and I'll link to that in a pinned comment on this video if you want to read it, although, as always, I'm strongly against reading. Reading is for nerds. Anyhow, blah blah blah, the next raid tier will once again drop class armor sets. There will be 5 pieces of tier gear fitting into the usual gear slots of head, shoulders, chest, gloves, and legs, and the bonuses will be 2-piece and 4-piece, so you'll be able to mix and match to accommodate for legendaries potentially fitting into one of those slots. And on the subject of legendaries, Blizzard also announced in this post their plan for Covenant-specific legendaries in patch 9.2, which I think firmly cements the idea that they're committed to the 2 legendary system being one Covenant-specific one, a second one of your choosing, and that's it. I don't think we're ever going to see that change, even deep into the patch, because there will be a new Covenant-swapping legendary that fits into your belt slot. And it gives you your Covenant-specific bonus regardless of what Covenant you are. Basically, it's all 4 Covenant legendaries rolled into one. And if you swap from Night Fae to Kyrian, the belt's Covenant ability also swaps from Night Fae to Kyrian. They've said it'll be available at a craft in another slot other than the belt, but they haven't decided what that will be yet, I'm guessing. I would think bracers or ring, probably. So this is great. You'll use the legendary belt and a second legendary, as well as 4 pieces of tier gear, and these bonuses should all be relatively easy to place onto any character with very little friction between what slots you're going to equip. This is good. This fixes the biggest problem I had with domination slots, domination sockets in the current tier, and yeah, they managed to actually transition out pretty gracefully. I'm very happy with this. Finally, there's the matter of how you will acquire tier gear. While obviously it'll just drop out of raids, and normally that would be the end of it, we wouldn't even talk about it. As you finish progressing through the patch content, creation catalysts will unlock, and these will use the new legendary upgrade currency Cosmic Flux, which apparently you're able to get everywhere. You're doing, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, world quests, raid bosses, Mythic Plus, PvP, blah blah blah. Terrific. You use that currency to upgrade a non-tier set armor piece into a tier set armor piece, carrying over the same armor slot and item level. Basically, this takes the very frustrating situation we've seen throughout patch 9.1, where you're wearing a normal or heroic domination slot piece of armor, you open your weekly cache, and a 252 item level piece in that same slot is available, but it's from Mythic Plus, so it's effectively worthless. Now you can take that worthless piece, hold on to it until you have the currency to convert it into a piece of tier gear, and boom, now you have a max level piece of tier in that slot. You didn't just have to take coins from the cache. This is a great system for alts and for bad luck protection. It's exactly what the community has been asking for years now, and I hope it's a design philosophy we continue to see in future expansions, because this is great. In terms of how quickly we'll get access to this kind of catch-up mechanic and all, that we don't know, but I would presume it'll probably be a month or 2 or 3 out. I don't think this is something that you're going to have access to immediately. It'll be something that you pick up basically, you know, after the World First race is done and after the first few weeks or maybe even months of messing around with Mythic Plus pushing as well. I think that's okay. Knowing that it's in the game and is in there from the very beginning of the patch and it's something to work toward feels a lot better than it just suddenly being thrown in a hotfix on a Wednesday 3 months into the patch. Even if that was their plan to do that all along, the fact that they've communicated it to us now, it just feels a lot better. It feels like they have a plan rather than, you know, they're whack-a-moling in response to negative feedback. Alright, now let's talk turkey. And by turkey, I mean tier. Again, we'll go alphabetically, so Death Knight's up first. Starting with the 2-piece on the left, I think this tooltip is actually a little incomplete. Despite the way that it's written, I think this is a bonus that only works while Dancing Rune Weapon is active. If that's correct, I think this clearly makes Crimson Rune Weapon the go-to legendary for all content, and probably better than Super Strain even for damage output. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The class is a lot tankier when it's benefiting from Crimson Rune Weapon, and this bonus will add some more duration and stat budget onto Dancing Rune Weapon, which can be great. The big problem here, and this gets doubled on with the 4-piece, is that Crimson Rune Weapon works better when you're AoE tanking. It doesn't really do anything if you're not actively tanking, and that's true of this 4-piece here as well. You reactively heart strike enemies when you parry. There's a short internal cooldown on this, so you won't be able to like parry 1,000 times a second, but it's pretty short, and I think this will make Dancing Rune Weapon into a really strong offensive cooldown in Mythic Plus and AoE tanking. That's on top of the 2-piece bonus and the extra rune weapon it's going to summon, which is great. It's going to be good. The problem is just the value in single target, and especially on single target fights where you're taunting a boss back and forth. I look at fights like Sylvanas or Painsmith, and I see this bonus losing most of its value. Meanwhile, in Mythic Plus, I think this could be incredibly strong and honestly really fun. Being able to use Dancing Rune Weapon and get back like 20 runic power per second passively just from parrying, causing you to heart strike, that sounds amazing. It's really opens up some possibilities in terms of Covenant choice too. Night Fae DK has kind of been a meme for a while, but I unironically think this might make it a possibility. You're going to passively be generating so much runic power from your tier set, and the 20% bonus to runic power generation on top of that from Night Fae is really nice. The potential to alternate between this and the Vinthyr ability is also very appealing, and probably the more likely setup for people who are trying to push Mythic Plus. You'll basically always either have some kind of major runic power generation ability rolling, or you'll still be in the process of spending all the runic power you just generated, and by the time it's done, oh, here's another big cooldown ready to go. So it's really nice in Mythic Plus. In raids, it's a little underwhelming. Alright, next up is Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter's 2-piece is fine. Honestly, it's not super great on its own. Generating 1 soul fragment every 10 seconds per nearby target kind of has the same problem as the DK set bonuses. It doesn't have the same problem of having to actually have threat on everything you're tanking, so that's at least good. But, you know, should a tier bonus really be 5, 10, 15 times stronger in Mythic Plus than it is in Raid? I don't know. It seems wrong. That being said, this 2-piece still has synergy with the Kyrian Demon Hunter legendary Blind Faith. It has synergy with Fiery Soul. If you're Kyrian, it even has synergy with Razlik's Defilement due to the Fury generation from Blind Faith, and Razlik's Defilement reducing the cooldown of Elysian Decree, which fuels Blind Faith even more. It's honestly not bad in single target, and it's very good in AoE. And then the 4-piece is insane. This works so well. It is functionally the permanent immolation aura build from Torghast, which has rightfully been celebrated as one of the strongest Torghast builds in the game. It's easily my favorite among tanks. It's so good. It synergizes with the 2-piece bonus, but also with talents like Agonizing Flames, Infernal Armor, Charred Flesh. The biggest complaint that Demon Hunter players have had, including myself over the past several years and several tiers, is that the class is too flimsy when it doesn't have cooldowns active. Legendaries this expansion have really helped increase that uptime, but that's really only made the disparity between the best case and worst case scenarios for Demon Hunter even more glaring. I think this is an enormous step in the right direction defensively, and also just really fun for the class. When you factor in the 2 legendary setup, this is also like a 50% damage buff. To be honest, that still doesn't make it as strong as Prop Pally, and I do not think that buffing any other tank up to the level of Paladin is a problem. I'm going to repeat that. Buffing other tanks up to Paladin levels of DPS is fine. I don't think that Pally does too much damage. I think the other 5 tanks don't do enough. But in terms of Blizzard's balancing history and the priority that they've always, exhibited is not to buff every single other thing up to the level of something that's overperforming, it's to nerf the one outlying guy. All this being said, because the designer responsible for Pally has thought it's good that they do like 40% more damage than other tanks so far during this expansion, I think there's a reasonable assumption that this set of overlapping bonuses for Vengeance Demon Hunter, putting them up into the Pally range, or at least close to it, might wind up getting nerfed pretty hard. The design is very good. I think this bonus is just one of several really awesome things that Vengeance Demon Hunter has going for it in patch 9.2, so even if they nerfed it by a lot, like 50%, I think the class still looks fantastic. But I am prepared for a nerf. Even a 50% nerf really wouldn't be the end of the world. I don't even know if it would prevent you from having 100% uptime normally. I'm just a little worried that they might wind up nerfing the 4-piece by like 90%, and that would be a bummer. Next up is Druid, and I think that this definitely doubles down on my idea from the Legendary preview video, which is that Vinthyr Bear Druid is going to do to Mythic Plus what Vinthyr Prop Pally has done to raids. It's going to do damage. The 2-piece is pretty simple, and it does add a good bit of juice onto Bark Skin. Bark Skin has generally been a pretty underwhelming defensive cooldown if you're not running the Bark Skin build, which involves swapping a talent and a legendary, but it is an extremely powerful cooldown if you are running that full setup. Even without switching to that setup, this adds quite a lot of value onto Bark Skin, both in terms of damage output and defensiveness. If you're using Survival of the Fittest, that takes about 15 to 20 more seconds off of Bark Skin's cooldown, which is great in that full Bark Skin setup. Or for occasional fights where Earth Warden doesn't do anything, like Sylvanas. But even if you are spec'd into Earth Warden, let's say you're doing a normal fight or Mythic Plus, this allows you to pop Bark Skin, hit Thrash 4 times, and get up to full stacks of Earth Warden. You really just can't go wrong. Presumably this bonus will work with Incarnation if you're talented into that. The only real difference between Incarn and Berserk is that Incarn lasts twice as long, which won't matter. It causes your Mangle to hit up to 3 targets, which generally doesn't matter if you're running the Thrash Legendary, which is typical. And it grants you 30% extra health while it's up. The extra health is really the key point here, and, since it's going to be 4 seconds either way, whatever. 30% more health is great. Having it for 4 seconds is fine. I think that even in raid, you're going to want to run Incarn now due to the 4-piece bonus. And the 4-piece bonus is very nice. It basically just turns Incarnation into an even bigger supernova of damage, which really synergizes with the Vinthyr Bear Druid setup I was talking about in the Legendary video. In Mythic Plus, you're going to be layering Incarnation, the Vinthyr Druid ability, the Thrash Legendary, the Vinthyr Druid Legendary, this 4-piece bonus, probably an Agility Potion and an IQD Trinket, and maybe Bloodlust or some other kinds of buffs. Get a Power Infusion, not even kidding. You should absolutely have no difficulty tanking like 4 packs at a time with all of that overlapping power. The problem is, of course, that you're also going to be relatively weak in the 150-second windows in between those unbelievable supernovas of AoE damage, but the 2-piece actually does help compensate for that quite a good little bit, and Bear Druid at its baseline is very tanky, so I don't really think this is a problem. This is just good. Now, as for rating, I do think this is a lot less impressive. You definitely still will be unkillable during Incarnation, but that's not really anything new. It really doesn't have the amazing synergy or value in more single target or 2-target cleave situations that it does in great big AoE. I mean, it's free real estate. The damage is, nice. And this does add some more offensive and defensive juice onto the Bark Skin setup. I like that aspect of it a lot. I think the idea of being a Kyrian Druid who's running the Bark Skin setup for progression rating looks a lot more appealing now. And it's not relying on the 4-piece, only the 2-piece to really get the majority of the juice. The defensive value and utility from running that whole setup is going to be really good. Nightfade Druid will also be good, but the synergy with either 2-piece or 4-piece just isn't there. It's still good, just kind of more middle of the road. Not as much damage in big AoE bursts as Venthyr, which, I think really only applies to Mythic Plus. I guess raid trash, who cares? But also not as consistently tanky as Kyrian in raid. But that'll also depend on the encounter design. I mean, if the damage done to tanks is like it was in Sanctum of Domination, that doesn't matter. Nightfade Druid will be the way to go in raids. We'll just have to see. Either way, I think this is a very nice set that looks really, really good with, a range of content and Covenant setups, and Druid looks really nice next tier and season. Now let's move on to Monk. This is the one pair of tier set bonuses that I just don't really have anything nice to say about. The 2-piece bonus is kind of disappointing. An extra 4% damage reduction is not a bad bonus, and if you're running Charred Passions, Breath of Fire has roughly 100% uptime, so this is kinda like 8% versatility that works in defense only. Now, technically speaking, it's actually a little better than 8% versatility because it's a flat 4% damage reduction being added onto your Breath of Fire. That's kind of overly mathy, whatever. It's 8% versatility, defense only. I've seen some people say this could make the talent Spitfire useful. They are wrong. Those people are bozos. It does add a bit of defensive synergy onto Charred Passions, which is fine, but even if you're running Storm Stout's last keg, you're still getting 75 to 80% uptime on Breath of Fire. So worst case scenario, it's a decent boring bonus. It's fine. The 4-piece bonus doesn't do anything. Increasing shuffle duration is literally useless. Brewmasters, even pretty bad ones, have zero difficulty maintaining 100% shuffle uptime. It's a fundamental component of the class. If you're just kind of randomly hitting buttons, you'll pull it off. Brew cooldown reduction might sound alright, but here's how it's tuned. If you use this bonus perfectly with 0 mistakes and 0 downtime, you get 1 extra Celestial Brew every 12 minutes. 12. So just to compare that to Sanctum of Domination, that means it adds 1 Celestial Brew usage in exactly 0 out of the 10 fights in that raid. Sylvanas is the only fight long enough for this bonus to do anything, but she has a ton of downtime, and that destroys this bonus's value. The bottom line is that Brew cooldown reduction is a horrible bonus. You don't ever have to have logged into a Brewmaster Monk to understand that you just don't hit all of your defensive cooldowns the second they're available. No tank does that. It doesn't even make sense as a concept. There are times where you need to use a cooldown instantly upon coming back up, but that's pretty rare. Usually you hold them to counteract a boss ability. Because of that, I don't think there's a situation where this bonus would ever do anything, even if a fight took hours to complete. You just would wind up wasting the brew cooldown reduction every time. It's so stupid, and I genuinely can't wrap my head around how bad this bonus is compared to every single other tier bonus that was revealed. In the interest of not just being rude, which, too late, I think the fundamental problem with this entire set is that it's built around Breath of Fire. Breath of Fire has always been the weakest part of Brewmaster Monk's kit, and building around it has always been a bad idea from the start. There's nothing redeemable about the 4-piece bonus. I don't think there's a shred of an idea that's good here. I've seen people suggest making it work with Keg Smash, which would bring the amount of time required to get an extra Celestial Brew, again, 1 shield, down to 4 minutes. Again, that sucks for all the reasons I laid out before. You're just not spamming CDs the moment they come up. There's nothing salvageable here. A bonus that interacts with Keg Smash or Blackout Kick in some kind of meaningful way could be good, but this is just nothing. And finally, this is the only tank tier set that doesn't add any kind of damage value at all. They just completely blew it on Monk bonuses, just like they did with legendaries at the start of the expansion. I can hope for a complete redesign and give a lot of feedback saying that's what needs to happen. But if it doesn't, I think this hurts Monk's value in the next raid tier in Mythic Plus season. You should still expect to see Monk get played in progression rating due to high-end guilds rightly assuming that they won't be guaranteed tier bonuses on their tanks, and Monk is tanky enough that it doesn't need any kind of tier set to be able to stay alive. When it comes to farm rating, raid progression for guilds that aren't in the rated World First race, pushing Mythic Plus as the season progresses especially, if this tier set and the breakdown I did in the Legendary video, if all of that holds up, I think Monk will be one of the least popular tanks. It should be. I mean, up until this point, they've really mishandled, they've bungled Monk bonuses thus far. Paladin, as usual, looks great. The 2-piece bonus is extremely simple. It's just an easy to maintain, always on 12% block chance increase. That's great. It's a good defensive bonus. It synergizes really nicely with Holy Shield to make Pally even stronger against spell damage, and auto attacks, obviously. That's all great. The 4-piece bonus for Pally is also pretty simple. It has the same issue as the Blood DK set and the Demon Hunter 2-piece in that it just scales up in value linearly with target count, and it does require that you're actively tanking in order for it to do anything. To be honest, I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that Blizzard's developers have been making continually over the last several years. Getting an offensive benefit for taking damage or being auto-attacked, or blocking or parrying or whatever, some sort of offensive benefit for tanking sounds good on paper, and it feels pretty good when you're currently tanking. In Mythic Plus, that's all the time. On some boss fights in raids, that's all the time, but for the bosses where you're taunt swapping back and forth and you're only getting to tank roughly half the time, I think it feels pretty bad. So I think this kind of bonus is going to synergize insanely well with Kyrian Paladin and Mythic Plus, and they're going to be absolutely overflowing with Holy Power. They're easily going to be able to maintain 100% Shield of the Righteous uptime, although they basically already do that now, so I think this mostly just translates into adding a ton more damage and more cooldown reduction via Righteous Protector, which means more wings uptime, which means more damage and resource generation, and so on. It's kind of like Protection Warrior was at this point last expansion. There are a bunch of positive feedback loops making the class better, faster, stronger, and so on. I think there's a possibility that some skillful players could convert all this new holy power into a bunch of words of glory, basically becoming like a serious healer as a prot pally. This disgusts me. Just do damage, what's wrong with you? In raids, I think that what this really does is it just kind of raises the floor on tankiness for Vinthier Pally. I don't think it has nearly the impact since you're mostly going to be tanking single target rather than AoE, so we're talking about, you know, whatever, maybe one holy power every 10 or 15 seconds as opposed to one every couple of seconds. You know, that's a pretty significant difference. But that being said, Vinthier Pally's already been really good in raids, and adding even just a modest amount more resource generation and tankiness onto it really kind of shores up like the one hole in their kit. So, yeah, the rich do actually get richer, don't they? And once again, here at the end, we have Warrior. Warrior's set bonuses are pretty cool. The 2-piece grants a stacking buff every time you spend 30 rage. Hit 8 stacks and your next Shield Slam, Thunderclap, or Ignore Pain will be a lot more powerful. The Ignore Pain part is easy to understand. It just absorbs 50% more damage. Good, boring, fine, whatever. The Shield Slam and Thunderclap parts are more interesting because they don't just say that they deal more damage, they say they are more effective. Presumably, this means that they'll deal triple damage but also generate triple rage. And Thunderclap would become a 10-second 60% AoE slow rather than a 20% slow. And that would go up to a 90% AoE slow if you're talented into Crackling Thunder. I don't know if this will interact with heavy repercussions, potentially making Empowered Shield Slams grant 3 more seconds of shield block uptime and 9 more rage. That may be too complicated of an interaction. I don't know. The Thunderclap extra slow with Crackling Thunder might actually be too complicated as well. It might only be a 70% slow instead of 90%, but I think that's a bit more likely. In any case, this is a good bonus. It gives you an occasional damage or defensive increase. It's passive, but it's a trackable buff, so a skilled player can monitor it and play around it accordingly. But even a relative novice can still make pretty decent use out of it. And the 4-piece bonus not only synergizes with the 2-piece very nicely, it adds defensive value onto Avatar, which is something the warrior community has been begging for since the removal of Azerite armor with the end of BFA. 10% DR is a little low for my liking. I really would like to see it go up to like 15 or 20%, but with stat budgets on gear continuing to go up and the 2-piece bonus generating big bursts of extra rage, I think Anger Management will definitely return to being the most popular talent in that final row. In rating, it already is, other than Sylvanas, but in Mythic Plus, it's really gone by the wayside in favor of Heavy Repercussions. I think it's going to be Anger Management all the way, everywhere in the future. As a result, I think Avatar uptime is going to be very high, like pushing above 50%. That's pretty good. I also think, going back to the Legendary video that I put out a couple of days ago, the synergy between this setup, Anger Management, and Necrolord, especially with the Necrolord Legendary, is very, very good. You get a major rage generation cooldown from being Necrolord, and thanks to the Legendary, the uptime on it is really high. You get big bursts of rage generation as a reward for spinning rage thanks to the 2-piece. You get more fuel for the fire out of the 4-piece. I still think Kyrian is going to be the most popular protection warrior setup due to the simplicity and the easy burst damage it gives you, but man, that Necrolord setup seems very interesting to me. The only downside I see is that intermissions in raid encounters or slow pulling in Mythic Plus really makes the wheels fall off of the whole Necrolord thing. Downtime is a killer. You basically have to be going at all times. And just as a last point on this, I think the thing I like most about it is that it's really good in Raid or Mythic Plus. It's really independent of target count. That's fantastic. All right, we're rolling toward the outro here. Patch 9.2 is coming, and as we can see, it's bringing a lot of new interesting stuff with it. Other than the monk tier bonuses, I'm pretty excited by what we've seen thus far. I still have hopes that they'll get that awful set of monk bonuses fixed, but then again, they didn't with monk legendaries for like 9 months, so I think this means we just have to overwhelm them with feedback on what an awful job they've done there. And on this one thing, I want to be clear, they really have done a good job everywhere else. I'm actually very impressed by how few misses there have been when it comes to the tank tier sets. I really came in with low expectations for tier sets. I mean, since they announced they were removing them, I've basically never expected them to come back as anything other than like versatility buffs. And while they somehow managed to limbo underneath my expectations for monk, they way exceeded them everywhere else. If this initial set of bonuses manages to hold, I think we're going to see something along the lines of Paladin continuing to dominate in raids, along with Demon Hunter really pulling ahead of the rest of the pack there. I think Druid and Pally would both become really dominant in Mythic Plus, and I think Demon Hunter would be right on their heels there as well. I think Warrior gets a good buff here in both Mythic Plus and raids, but it's not enough to fix the problems with the base class, or the fact that the two most popular Covenant Legendary bonuses for Warrior are very boring flat damage increases that really don't add much at all. Blood DK is basically in the same boat as Warrior, although I think it gains more juice in Mythic Plus, like quite a lot more, and then a lot less in raids. And finally, Monk basically gets nothing. In terms of high-end progression rating, that's not really a problem. Again, you don't go into a world first race assuming you're going to get tier sets on your tanks. And we still don't know how long the 2 legendary system is going to take to unlock. So if it's not available day 1 of Mythic Week, or let's say day 1 of Mythic Week 2, Monk will probably still be extremely popular for progression rating, like maybe the most popular tank. It's still very fast, it's still very tanky, and it provides a critical buff. If nothing else changes, I think that outside of that tier of play, Monk could see a serious drop in popularity due to a lack of useful, interesting bonuses. Windwalkers and Mistweavers have also been pretty disappointed by their tier bonuses and 2 legendary setups. At least this is what I've been told. I could be wrong there. So if both Mistweaver and Windwalker drop in popularity, I think Brewmaster may actually go up in popularity in raids, even though it's getting the worst new stuff of any tank. In Mythic Plus, I think there's zero question that Monk becomes one of the least popular tanks, maybe even last place if everything stays as it is now. But again, if there's a large enough volume of negative feedback and positive feedback about all the other stuff that's good, I want to give credit there. Hopefully it'll change. Again, I don't want to end on a down note here. I want to be clear. I'm very positive about 95% of the stuff that's coming in this patch. I'm positive about the direction of the game. I think they screwed up one thing, and I think it's fixable, and I'm positive. Yeah, I'm positive. Well, we can't wait to see the rest of the updates and break them down as they come out. I think that about covers it. If you have any questions about tanks in Shadowlands Patch 9.2, ask away. Stay tuned for more Shadowlands content, and thank you for watching. Bye.